I'm Jane Ryan, and I am facilitating an opportunity to speak to people who've made contributions and been involved in the development of the Women's Center in Marquette, Michigan. It was developed in the mid-70s along with the women's movement that was taking place throughout the country. The funding and other issues have forced our local Women's Center to narrow its focus a bit from that time in those early years, but it continues to be an important resource in our community and is located on South Front Street in Marquette. The Women's Center celebrated its 40th anniversary last year, making it one of the oldest, if not the oldest, service in the state of Michigan. I'm happy to have the opportunity to speak with Peggy Frazier, who has been involved in many ways over the years. She will tell us about her involvement and the roles with the Women's Center and her perception of its mission and the value of that mission. The Women's Center and NMU appreciates your willingness to participate in this project, Peggy. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me. I got involved in the Women's Center when I was a member of the staff at Northern Michigan University, running the pharmacy and the health center, and also doing some things administratively. Eventually I ended up coordinating the Title IX program for women athletes and the 504 disability regs and so forth. So as part of that mission, I got involved in the Women's Center that we had on campus. And originally my focus was on the fact that I felt that although we had a good deal of funding for full-time students at the university, we were sorely lacking in facilitating the ability of women who have had children and are married to go back to school and get degrees and start working and leading productive lives if they so chose to do so. I laughingly remember that when I had my daughter talk to my Zonta Club early in her life, she told them that the only difference between having a mom who worked and a mom who didn't work was the fact that she was 10 years old before she realized that homemade cookies were not the kind you sliced from the dough in the refrigerator. So basically, here were these women who wanted to find their life's work and get careers and add to family incomes, and there was no funding available for them because they were not quote full-time students. So one of the major things that the Women's Center did is facilitate a lot of the funding for push the university, and it was a win-win situation. The university got students and the women got the access to these programs. There were also obviously men too that took advantage of this. AAUW, for example, started a program for women. BEO had programs for women. So various women groups took the torch and moved forward with it. The university at some point decided that it needed to cut back on anything that wasn't essential to its mission, and it was deemed that the Women's Center was not essential to its mission. May have been a little bit of politics involved, but at any rate, it gave the Women's Center an opportunity, challenges are always opportunities, to go out and find an alternative home. And with that alternative home came the freedom to really advocate strongly for positions for women, such as choice, that it really didn't have as part of the university. So it really in some ways turned out to be a blessing rather than a curse. So eventually, and I'm sure other people have talked about the progression from being in a church basement to finding the Women's Center building. And Sally May, who was the director at that time, and I, when we looked at the building, we both had a vision of what it could become for the Women's Center. The stumbling block, of course, was getting a loan and also rehabilitating the building, which was in somewhat significant states of disrepair. During the time when we had to clean out all the clutter in the building, I guess my main claim to fame was I was able to borrow a dump truck from Fraco, and at on my lunch hour, I would jump into the dump truck, jump into my car, go to the Women's Center, get in the dump truck and take it out to the landfill with the stuff that had been accumulated, and then bring it back and do the same thing at the end of the day.
Driving a dump truck was not a traditional woman's role either. You were modeling.
And then I was dressed for work, remember, too. So the guys at the landfill got quite a kick out of it, and they treated me well, and we had fun with it. But essentially, we had a variety of different groups that came in and volunteered to just clean out the crap. That was the major problem. And then from then on, we started the renovations. Many of the construction firms and the unions and everything were very involved in doing a lot of the work, and of course we had been running the bingo game, so we had some resources there. We had enough money. We got some money, some state funding to do some of the remodeling, and got labor donated. But the big problem, of course, was buying the building, and so we negotiated a rather unique deal with the seller of the building, where we were able to do a combination of both money up front and money down the road, as I called it. And that, I guess, if we have any claim to fame in the Women's Center thing, I was it in terms of putting together a deal where the buyer, who was living comfortably at the time, but didn't need the money right up front, was able to benefit from some long-term policies that we put in place that were worth a considerable amount of money, but didn't cost us as much as the money that was being given.
Right. Peggy, was that one of your skills, the financial
but
looking over, or just as a part of the board? Were you on the board at the time?
I was on the board at the time, and we just needed to figure out a way to be able to use the money that we had to buy the building. And so one of the ideas I came up with was the business of, instead of offering him all cash, of buying policies that would cover his family and himself, and that would not cost us the amount of money that he would eventually get from it. So then because, as you know, life insurance is not taxable if you do it the right way, it worked out to his benefit, and he was able to sell us the building for a price we could afford, although we still had to take a loan on the building. And at that point in time, I couldn't even get a credit card in my name. I was working full-time at the university. I was a pharmacist. I was professional and everything else. But after I married my husband, and I have a letter that I still show to young women when I talk places today, telling me that I didn't qualify for a credit card in my name, that I would have to be in my husband's name, and then I would be a card holder under his name. So it was amazing that Range Bank, which was at that point the Nagani Bank and is now Range Bank, was willing to, first of all, give us a loan, and second of all, of course, it needed to be co-signed. And being young and foolish and not realizing the impact of what I was doing, I co-signed the loan. The bank was comfortable with that and supportive, and I was comfortable with knowing the women that were on the board, the founding mothers as we called them. I felt that this was a no-brainer, that we were going to make it and we were going to be able to do this, and so it didn't concern me at the time. And eventually, over a series of years, when the loans were refinanced, then my name was off. I was off the hook, so to speak.
Right. To me, this points out again, and it's come up in other parts, that we were fortunate at key times to have within the community somebody who would sell under another rather unusual arrangement that benefited him and his family, but also I sensed some support just for the cause. The bank was not backing off from the cause, and that doesn't always happen in communities.
It does not, and it was exactly as you say, the people that stepped forward, the women that had, Jerry DeFont, who was on the Women's Center board, that had great connections with the unions and was able to get them involved in terms of labor. Recently, of course, the Women's Center embarked on a project to replace all the lighting in the building. The lighting in the building being replaced into the new lighting is basically going to save somewhere between $3,000 and $4,000 a year on the electric bill, which is just amazing. But the cost, although the electricians were willing to install the lights, we had to fund the purchase of the lights. So we auctioned off the front yard at the Women's Center auction, and two gracious community donors bought the front yard and had their party together, so they both paid for it. We had enough money to pay for all the lights, and they're being installed, and we'll eventually save somewhere between $3,000 and $4,000 a year on the electric bill, which will help to lower the cost of operation considerably for people. The building is in somewhat of a transition at this point, in that it will, one of the major tenants may be moving elsewhere, but the founding mothers, I'm sure, will figure that one out too. I think it's in a good location. It's in a prime location, and eventually, I think it could be sold to help stabilize the funding for the Women's Center in terms of providing an endowment without all the responsibilities and the hassles of operating the building. And being able to just focus on the programs for women is important. But the main thing is that over the years, in addition to other programs, the spouse abuse program, the Harbor House and things like that have been able to survive and thrive and provide resources for women. And the whole point of all this is for our daughters who are growing up to have opportunities that we did not.
How you were on the board for an extended period? How did you, because I've heard your name mentioned in connection with a lot of different things, have you consistently been involved?
There was a time when I think we were discussing the whole matter of having the board have a system by which people would rotate on and off the board. That would give the board the opportunity to have fresh blood and new ideas. And there also was a situation in the community where it was felt that the board was rather, whether it was inappropriate or not, depends on your point of view, but the board had been somewhat of a closed circle for many, many years, and there was the thought that maybe with some different people and some different voices on the board, things could have changed in that particular situation. And so I thought it was important for us to step up and serve as sort of a role model and example, and many of us rotated off the board at that point, and we had new people, some of which who didn't understand necessarily the history as well as the founding mothers, and so there were a few stumbles and a few fumbles, but as usual, women always figure a way. They do that with their families, they do that with their jobs, they do that with life. They make it work.
Make it work, and the loyalty that seems to have come through, that people, when again the numbers of folks on the board grew smaller, the founding mothers, I love that term, returned and can rejuvenate, but agreeing, as you said, that you do need turnover, you need fresh ideas, you need different approaches to things. And I don't know, but you probably have more insight. Are they finding young women interested in supporting the Women's Center or volunteering or? We're
having it's an interesting dilemma that we face, not only as a Women's Center, but as a community, as a country. Young people today that are working and have jobs, many of them are basically working 24/7, and I can look at my own kids, and my daughter works 3 out of 4 weekends, and a lot more than 40 hours a week, and in addition to that is a single parent, so she's doing it all and still doing some volunteering, but not anywhere near as much.
There's just not time in their lives.
There just isn't time in their lives, and this is happening in so many instances with so many families and so many young people. they hopefully will reach a point, and there are some that are able to devote more time. But again, part of the problem is I think we maybe have dropped the ball a little bit here in terms of continuing to educate them about the progress that's been made, and the need for us to remember that there were things were all at one point very different. And I remember when Helvi Sipila came to town, and she was from the United Nations and everything, and spoke at one of our groups that we had for the Women's Center, and she mentioned, and I said something to the effect to her that I felt that sometimes that women in the United States were kind of like always asking for more and always asking for more, and we should instead be focusing our efforts on trying to help women in other countries who have nothing in the way of rights or are still property of their husbands and so forth. And she said, no, it's really important for you to do both, of course, but the most important thing is for you to continue to move forward, because you are the beacon that's shining in the distance that other women are working toward. And so you need, and I've always remembered that and thought it really made sense that yes, there are countries where women are basically chattel, but there's a lot of them where they have made progress, and so they need to keep moving forward, and we need to keep moving forward.
Right, and it has been pointed out in some ways that, and civil rights issues too, that you tend to take for granted some things that people have worked hard to earn for you, and some of those benefits are still challenged by certain groups of people, so you can't really take them for granted. We have to keep promoting, and if not enlarging, like you say, we don't need to ask for more, but we need to continue to protect the things that have been earned.
We're running Spam a lot at Lake Superior Theater, and my favorite line in the play is when Sir Lancelot is talking about marrying his partner, and they are talking about, and he makes an aside remark, and in 1,000 years this will still be controversial. And of course it is. We've made progress, but it is controversial. So people forget how much progress we've made, but we still have ways to go. Yeah. And so we need to.
Well, and I think over time, and maybe you've probably got more insight on this, they had more programs when there was more funding available, government grants and things, so they've had to cut back. Do you see the focus as being what you personally hope continues? Are there areas that you wish, or trends that you wish could be followed in support of women's issues?
And I think that the founding mothers who were very conscious of that have kind of renewed that focus, as I see now. The ones that are working really hard now to support the Women's Center and to reinvigorate it are looking at the possibility of doing some additional programming, and instead of just focusing on the Women's Center. But it became a problem for the board that was in place some years back, because it was hard for them to focus on anything other than that, because the funding constraints were so difficult. And over the years, the costs have continued to skyrocket astronomically. I guess you think about what's happened to the price of a gallon of gas, and the funding instead has diminished rather than gone up accordingly. So we've had to do a lot more with less, and so there have not been the resources there to do some additional programming, and hopefully, and a lot of challenges in the Harper House programming and moving the house, and all of those things have caused a lot of energy to be expended in that area. But yes, I'm hopeful that it will become again popular or prevalent or something. But the other issue is that we have to find new ways to reach young people, because they don't watch our local TV channels, they don't read the local paper. They basically, their lives revolve around social media, and they probably know very little about the history of the Women's Center
Is that being discussed with the Women's Center as approaching?
the
I know a
need,
lot
the
of
whole-
other organizations are
Right,
trying to deal with it.
It's not unique to the Women's Center. Every organization, it's a problem I have with Lake Superior Theater. How do I reach and communicate with the young people who have dish networks, so they don't see the local TV channels and they don't read the local paper, and they, you know, they're very selective. And by the time you catch up and get on their social media, Facebook is now our generation. You know, the young kids have all gone on to Snapchat and Instagram and other ways of communicating. So.
And you can't leave the stalwarts, the founding mothers, behind. I mean, they still need communication. And speaking for myself, I'm not a founding mother, but it's hard to keep up just the understanding of the equipment. So nobody else has raised that point, but I think that's a challenge out there.
Just the idea of trying to find the right mechanism for us to sell tickets for the theater. I mean, the young kids all want to do it online. They don't care about service fees. Older people want coupons to clip, and they don't want to pay any service fees, and they want to be able to call and talk to a human being, and they, you know, so there's these very diametrically opposed needs out there that have to be met by organizations who are trying to serve customers.
Yes, exactly.
And some of us are surviving, and of course, as you know, many institutions are not doing as well in terms of meeting that need.
Can we go backward just a little bit, Peggy, because you've referred to the fact that you were at Northern as a pharmacist, but in the era that you got your degree, professional jobs like that were not as common for women. They weren't out of this world. But what drew you to a professional, and did you have the support you needed as you got your education and launched your career?
With my parents, of course. And at the time I graduated out of a class of 100, there were 4 women. And now the classes are almost predominantly, I mean, they're like just a little bit more than half, somewhere between 55 and 60% women. So there are a lot of women who have figured out that it's a great profession and that you can work part-time if you choose to, and you're able to, and also, you know, you can have some flexibility in your work life at times when you need it and that sort of thing. So I guess that the opportunity to work at Northern was fabulous for me because of the fact that I was able to do other things, and they were flexible with me about being able to be gone to serve on the Fair State University Board and serve on the I didn't get paid, of course, like men did when they went to their service projects. But it was a little different situation in that somebody had to be in the pharmacy, so basically I would take lost pay and somebody would get paid to be in the pharmacy. On the other hand, there were situations where people were paid. So it's kind of interesting that even back then, although I was permitted, it was at my expense, you know. So
And had you been drawn to the sciences as a young person? Again, there are these STEM projects now to get young women out of their traditional study groups.
And I had we were a unique class in that we had a group of us that kind of all moved together through the sciences and had great teachers who didn't really differentiate between men and women, and you know, encouraged us and really motivated us. People like Tom Nas, and you know, who just really.
So the right people at the right time again.
People at the same time again, yeah. And so I think that it was amazing the number of women in my particular graduation class that kind of went into the science area or professions and that sort of thing. And of course now we take it quite for granted, but there was a time when, as you know, when that was a difficult challenge. And particularly, you know, there were women back then that graduated from law school and had difficulty getting jobs with law firms because they said, well, you know, you're not going to.
You're a woman.
You're a woman. You're going to get pregnant. You're going to leave, and so there was no such thing as maternity leave or anything like that.
So the examples, I believe, the examples set by people such as yourself who have been in those things do make a difference. And I think that was that program where they had people like yourself go into the high schools at a time where young women often didn't consider the non-traditional.
And even just having them come and visit if they had any interest in that area, to come and visit the workplace, and there were so many things that were available. And now, I don't know, do we have one counselor for the number of kids in the high school? I mean, there's no funding for any of those things anymore. What happened to it all, I don't know, but it's just
directed to other priorities. Well, this has been great. Are there any areas about your relationship or role in the Women's Center that you'd like to mention that we haven't touched?
Probably one thing that I would mention is that I had a very talented, articulate, musically talented mother who actually had a radio show in UP. I mean, in Detroit before she and my dad moved up here. And I sensed and I saw with her that her life kind of ended when they left Detroit, because this community was just an entirely different community, and she wasn't permitted by my dad to do things that I think would have made her life more complete. And so I think that when you talked about motivation, I think that's part of the motivation that I see, is the fact that we all need to try and figure out what floats our boat, what makes us happy, what gives us, you know, the challenges in life that we can contribute. Put something back in the pot, plant a tree you're never going to sit under and everything. And I think back of the things the opportunities we've missed with women over the years not being able to participate fully. And so it's important, I think, that the Women's Center existed when women needed role models to move up, and now they need them even more to move ahead and to do more things, and for us to all keep progressing. So
right, and it does seem that right now, and we've talked about why, the financial constrictions, the Women's Center hasn't been able to play that role about modeling as much as it's been protecting women. It's having to deal with the issues that have really been sad for women. So the balance is hard to maintain with funding and
then even if we do those programs, then people come, and how do we reach them? So they're not insurmountable, but it's going to take a lot of time and energy to kind of do this all over again.
Right.
So.
I'm glad you mentioned your mother's example. Now, from the other side of it, was your own husband relatively supportive, or did you feel like he had to be educated?
No, he never had to be educated. He always was the first one to say, "You go, don't worry about the kids, I'm fine."
Excellent.
So, I mean, he just really
You made a good pick then.
And he's still, at this day, is the first one to step up. When I have issues and problems at the theater, he's the first one there down fixing things. He literally, one time, when the air conditioner failed, stood there through the entire second act with a screwdriver on a little connection that wire had broken, so that we would have air conditioning for the second act. So he's amazing. So I've been extremely fortunate.
Yeah. We've had different examples of that. One woman who's been extremely active in the community said that her husband was very proud of being supportive because he let her do all these things. And she said, when I heard that word, he was wonderful to her, but in his mind, he was giving permission versus that was her right to do it. So there's been evolution, and probably always will be, because many of, at least in our age group, husbands were reared in families, the traditional role, and that was what they knew. So again, I'm trying to lead to the educational role that the Women's Center has played throughout the community by these women.
And hopefully will
modeling.
continue to play for a long time.
Absolutely. Okay, well, thank you, Peggy. This has been a lovely
Thank you
time,
for doing
and
this. It's a
thank you for your
wonderful-
role in helping the Women's Center stay constant, because that is the main theme that I, as an interviewer, see is the amount of volunteer and generalized support that this community has given. Without that, we wouldn't exist.
And when you talk about it being a unique, I think you are correct in saying that it is the longest women's center that has been independent and freestanding. There are women's centers, I think, that have been in operation as long or longer, but they're connected with a
Institution,
university or
yeah.
some sort of an institution
Okay.
and stuff. So I think we can be pretty proud of what the women in this community have accomplished, and look forward to great things in the future.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Jay.